So, question, is today actually your anniversary?
No.
Oh, well, I put it in the blurb. Wasn't it recently?
It's the 6th.
Okay, so it's in 2 days. Okay.
Yeah. So it's
And
pretty
how
it's this yeah.
how many years married is that?
9.
Amazing. Amazing. So, Margaret, Josh, and I go back to 2012.
I think 11
10.
or 10. Yeah, 10.
11.
Okay. And so I was working in South Australia and I met this guy and he said, "Well, you got to go work in Alaska." I worked there and I said, "Yep, that sounds like a great idea." And then what they helped us do when we were they organized that we all get roommates and try to figure out how to live in Alaska because none of us have lived there before. And Josh and I got roped into this pretty it was like a subsidized apartment. It had linoleum floor, the same floor that was the same flooring that was in the bathroom, was in the kitchen, was in the living spaces. And so I wanted to, Josh and I hit it off talking about sports, and Josh is a Pittsburgh fan. And I was talking about social sciences last week, and I had 200 social work students in this lecture hall. And I said, "Oh, this is my friend Josh." And, there was a student who wore a Boston Bruins hat the whole time. And I said, he is a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. And I looked out, and across 200 faces, I saw this one student going, "Mm-mm." So anyway, and then so we were all just field guide, like learning how to be field guides, working outdoors for extended periods of time with young people in Alaska. And so, Margaret, I know, Josh, you came from a background of raft guiding. You went to, tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but you went to Korea and taught English as well, from what I remember. And so, was it just your interest in doing something different and trying something else?
Yeah, so I had worked was teaching English in Korea, and my contract was almost up, and I was kind of looking for the next thing to do. And it's something similar where a friend of mine, Trey Bell, had said he was a uh, clinician at Alaska Crossings, and he said, "Come up here." And so that's kind of where I was in Korea, filling out the application and doing my interviews from Korea, and then
Mm.
came home, was there did a rafting season, then went up to Alaska after that.
Yeah. And then, Margaret, what brought you to our awesome cohort in Alaska?
Um, I went to the School of Environmental Studies for high school on the Minnesota Zoo campus, and a couple of guys that I guess I don't know how they got connected with crossings, but I went to the Boundary Waters on a trip with one of them, and they had both gone up and worked at crossings a season just guiding. And yeah, I came back, or he came back. We ended up going on a Boundary Waters trip, and he was telling me, because I had been in like the human services world, but not like the blend of the outdoors and the human services, because I was working at a homeless youth shelter, and it was like transition age adults, so 18 to 21. And that was a challenging population, especially kiddos timing out of foster care.
Mm.
And yeah, so we went on that Boundary Waters trip. I had been in like the experiential education world for so long, and he was telling me about Alaska Crossings, and it just seemed obviously like a really, really neat way to blend human services with experiential stuff. And so I went up there.
Mm.
On a whim. I had like I had canoeing experience, I had camping experience, but not to the degree that Crossings was expecting. I think that's where Josh came in with like a extremely high level of technical, where I came in with like a pretty low level of technical, but I definitely had the soft skills.
Mm.
So yeah. Yeah.
So, either one of you, can you give, for those that don't know, the elevator pitch? And unfortunately, Alaska Crossing no more. But what did this work involve, and give the 1 minute spiel about what Alaska Crossings is?
Me? Okay. So at the time when we were there, because there were a number of iterations of their programming. Well, I guess for the full duration of crossings in their operating days, they offered mental health services to kiddos, so 13 to 18, struggling in the home environment, community, or the school environment. They all had to opt in, so they had to choose to come to crossings, and they were referred by a number of sources. I think everyone thinks that they were incarcerated kids because it was a nonprofit and because it was fully funded by Denali Kid Care. And that I could probably spend an entire hour talking about the funding, but they all had to choose because of those reasons, and they were not incarcerated. They just struggled in those areas of school, community, and home. And at the time we were all there, it was 51 days of operating out in the Alaska wilderness. So we were in the Tongass National Forest. We went up into British Columbia and we canoed, we hiked, and we just used the experiential therapeutic aspects to coach those kids, because a lot of them, the families were not going through like tandem programming, and there were no aftercare options. So a lot of what we worked on as like the technical sort of direct care staff was this is what you can do in your environment. It's not like there was no expectation that you're going to go home to a different environment. Like, this is how you can change. And also a lot of kids came from like really impoverished situations. So some of the kids that chose to come but weren't very engaged in the like therapeutic aspects. I remember asking a kiddo one time, I'm like, hey, it seems like you're really struggling to be here. Can you just tell me, why did you choose to come? And the girl told me, she was like, I get 3 meals a day. And I said, that's awesome. That's fair. Let's do that. Like, let's make you 3 really good meals a day, and we can do that. So, so it was kind of a wide spectrum. We had kids come from like really the far reaches of Alaska, like Savunga and, Platinum, Barrow. And then we had kids come from Anchorage and Wasilla and Palmer, which were, predominantly white, but yeah, so it's pretty wide. Am I doing a good job? I'm looking at both of you guys. It's a lot to cover, and the elevator pitch is tough.
Yeah, it is tough, but it's the most different. When I got there, it was the most different looking of a program that I had worked at, and not being overly like, I mean, we got funded, there was funding to do group work and this sort of stuff, but there was also a focus on a lot of psychological safety, in the sense of not really diving really deep into stuff while we're having kind of a good time in the outdoors and kind of staying on the surface. And for context, as 3 Americans, it's Alaska and Hawaii count as 50 states, but they're sort of not part of the 50 states. So we have 50 states, and then you have the lower 48, which is all the states that make up that interesting outline of the United States. And I wanted to talk with Josh, because it's always really interesting to me when you all ended up coming back to the normal America, if you will, if that exists. And you went into counseling. So you had teaching, outdoor guiding, wilderness therapy guiding. And then what actually led you to go, actually, I want to go into the clinical space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely that time working at Crossings. I think all in all, we worked there for 6 years, and 4 years I worked there as a guide, doing those 52-day trips. And so you're out there with those guys, I mean, with the kiddos for a really long time. And there's no, a lot of programs too where there's guide shifts where it's like 8 days on, 6 days off, and you kind of like have a break. But I felt like that cohort model of 52 days, you just really get to know them really well. And so I found just wanting to build that relationship with folks continue to be in like an environment that wasn't living away from my family for 52 days, where I could get like establish that kind of relationship with folks. And so I just initially went into school counseling because I really I loved working with that population, the adolescents, and I found again like I feel like being able to be in the schools with the kids day in and day out, I could get that relationship with kids. And so I got into school counseling, did that for a while. And so I would go, I was in school and I'd kind of come back up to Alaska and do programs like while we were and programs are like kind of the shifts that we call them, like working a program was like one the guide shift up there. And so I'd still go up there and work like a program or two a year while I was in school, and then got a job as a school counselor. And then I think from there, school counseling, I really honed in on the family work, which I do now. And I think really seeing where crossings, like Margaret stated earlier, there really was no aftercare. I mean, there was some stuff like get them set up with if they're interested in doing this, we can like look at local resources and like give them information. But it was zero. There was not a lot of family involvement while the kid was in at crossings. And as I was a school counselor, just seeing these kids that no matter how hard you try to like, work with the kid, there was like they're going back to this environment that is just really it's hard to maintain progress and gain. And so I think that really pushed me toward work towards being family therapist. I'm not an MFT, and so
Hmm.
I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor, which is in North Carolina. But I'm focused. My role now is as a family therapist.
Awesome. And Margaret, I just muted you just because there was a little echo, but you can unmute now though. And Margaret, you took a different path. You didn't go towards the clinical therapy side. You went to the risk management side, and you presented for social sciences last week. And I love just some of the informal conversations we've had, that what I've learned from this idea of you're not really waiting. Your program is not safe just because someone hasn't died yet. And so can you say what led you to have this professional career in the risk management safety side of adventure therapy and outdoor work?
Yeah, I guess, well, it just has always been my proclivity to focus on more systems thinking, and emotions are not that way apparently. Which is a little frustrating for me. I think I've realized it as I've started to get in, I'm not that old, but in my like mid to late 30s, like I'm a little bit of a Vulcan. I just need things to be a little more systems oriented. And I went, after leaving crossings, I went and got my wilderness EMT, and that is my favorite way to think, is having sort of a like, okay, I need to go through my differential diagnosis. I need to check the boxes and make sure I'm not missing anything. And I need to do a full patient assessment, and doing that actually really helped me understand, like, this actually really fits for my brain and what I care about. And not that I don't care about the emotional experience, but it's just not a strength. It's just not, like, I'm not very good at doing I feel statements. I'm not very good at validating. I'm okay with accepting that about my strengths and weaknesses. And I actually really like supporting and teaching field staff. That's something I do feel I get personally fueled by coaching people through learning how to assess risk and do it with that systems type thinking. So yeah, it just the I feel statements never really caught me. So just said no, thank you.
And so you're married to a counselor. Nice.
Yeah. And he helps me so much. I'm so grateful for his emotional intelligence, because it does not exist on this side of the marriage.
All right. Well, back to Josh for a second. I was wondering, Josh, if you look back at your because it's always interesting. I mean, for me, being embedded in Australia for the past 10 years since my brief time at Crossings, your much longer time, that I can see how my experience has changed the way I look at a lot of things. And so I wonder, as you have worked as a counselor now, and you're on the East Coast in North Carolina, near the Appalachian Mountains, how does your training now, how do you look at, how has that changed adventure therapy work or thinking about doing therapy in the outdoors? Not necessarily 50 days in one chunk, which is obviously pretty amazing of a rich experience. What has changed about the way you look at this work, do you think? You brought up family, and when you work with young people, that's the main system. What have you noticed?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, I think what I noticed and was drawn to was the family work. And so I think recognizing it, it's not so much, it's recognizing what programs don't have. And I think, and then also really understanding really good family programming when I see it, like where the last wilderness or the new adventure therapy program I worked with was in North Georgia, and I think they have a really strong family program there, and it's like we're really encouraging them to come out and spend a couple days in the woods. They're doing workshops, they're doing weekly phone calls, they have a whole pathway for the parents. And so that, I think that my orientation around that has really changed, where if it's where a kid like at Crossings, and I think Crossings was around, like, it was still pretty young, where um there wasn't really a lot of family involvement. And I think just the whole model is shifting, where the understanding that for people to keep gains, I think the family system has to change. And so I think my long-winded answer is that I view that of if the family involvement is there, I think I find it more fulfilling and more like I'm drawn to it more. I think if I was asked to work at a program like Crossings now, I think it'd be like, I think there'd be a lot of misses that were happening there. And I think that's just like how, again, like your question was how I've evolved in my thinking of what does like good, healthy treatment options look like. And I think the evolution of the family work is the thing that I'm really latching onto, and that I've seen a lot of programs do.
Well, I think that's really good. I always think if you've started a program or you've worked at a program and you think it's the perfect program, you're wrong. And it's it's kind of like, it's kind of like if you're in your workplace and there's no assholes in your workplace, you're the asshole in the workplace. That if you think you have found the best program, you haven't. And so I think it is that constant evolution of going, what did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? And what can we do better? And so, Margaret, when it comes to safety, I'm just going to flop back and forth between you two and play with what comes into my mind.
Or also, well, before we move on, I think that like before, sorry, that keeps track of that comment, but the thing that sticks out is it was hard. I think the first times leaving Crossings, there's this pride, right? Like I think there's this not like actually it was like machismo. I was like, oh, cool, we have the longest guide shifts. Like we're out in the Alaskan wilderness. We're like working with this really tough population, and so it was hard for me to look back at Crossings and say, man, there was a lot of stuff we were missing there. Like so. I think that mentality of not just sticking with this is how I came up in guiding. This is what taught me so much. And I just like I met my wife there. Like I met like lifelong friends there. Like I'm so attached to that program, but to not have those blinders on, to look back and say like, yeah, that I love that place. And there was a lot that we could learn from and do differently and learn from that. Yeah. I just wanted to pitch that up there too.
That's a huge thing. And we see this in, there was a study that came out this year that, and I believe it was in Denmark, but a huge community-based mental health agency, they brought in some new way of working, right? So some new evidence-based whatever, they brought it in, trained up the staff, and the people who had worked there the longest were the first ones to quit because it didn't feel like So even if it was a good idea, and I don't know if it was, but what was interesting is the people most resistant to the change come with that pride, I think. And I think this is a natural human thing that none of us would keep doing it if we weren't good enough at it. You know, and we all saw people who came and we watched them canoe in Alaska and we went, no, 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 no. This is not for you. And just even sleeping and being and getting wet and all, you know, raining all the time. But it is really interesting that point of how do with an organization, and this is I think a really good segue over to Margaret, when you have ways of working that have just been this way for that long, and we don't need to talk about big cans of worms, but like even just teaching people about risk management, and that an incident report isn't just for a broken leg. An incident report can be for something almost happening, so you can keep learning and adapting and having this dynamic risk management. So Mark, what's it like as someone who has plopped into different cultures of organizations?
Oh my heavens. In terms of like how, okay. Can you re-ask your question so I make sure I'm like tracking? Because you guys just said a lot. I feel like I could answer so much.
All right. If you were going to say an I feel statement.
Oh my gosh, well, David, take that back right now.
Okay. So if I'm just wondering about like, so you leave Crossings and you have this immense pride. You two have met, you're a family, and you've left this amazing experience, and then you start not only bringing that experience with you into other places where you go, this is not like Crossings, and then but also knowing what your expertise is as a wilderness EMT, which is an emergency medical technician for those that don't know. We don't have those in Australia. So okay. So you have you get dropped into these, you parachute into these other organizations, and you're going, let's think about risk from this way. And then you're up against uncooperative systems who things don't like to change, and you start to see it. And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. So it's so interesting because I mean, I think that we have a pretty unique experience, at least in the American system of like wilderness therapy, that Crossings is where I was like kind of birthed and brought up, and how I oriented to what it means to be in that field. And so much of the focus of our training was technical. I couldn't, I'd have to actually go ask Steve Przonka, who's the founder, to say like, could you do an algorithm of like, what was the focus on technical versus soft skills? But to me, it felt like it was like 70-30. Like we focused 70% on our technical skill and 30% on soft skills, which for the population we were working with is what we needed. Because like, all we needed to do as field staff was be consistent role models. We needed to show up in alignment with our values. We needed to show up and be regulated. And then we just needed to be consistent role models, because these kids that we were working with at Crossings, they didn't have that. They didn't even have consistent meals. So I think then going down to the lower 48 programs, it was actually really challenging because it was the full flop of that. And that was really difficult for me. It really confused me because I was like, wait, why did these guides, what I found is that the staff ended up really struggling to assess risk appropriately, because they were trained so heavily on the soft skill or like the emotional risk, which is still really valid. Like, yeah, we're working with kids with severe trauma. We're working with kids with a full spectrum of diagnoses, which that was kind of interesting. Like the diagnoses that we got to work with was so acute in the lower 48 system that to some degree they had to do that. They had to make sure that they were focusing on the soft skills. But at the same time, it didn't change what the direct care staff's role was. That doesn't change what we're expecting out of field staff. They still need to be consistent role models. They still need to be able to show the kids that are there, like, I can keep you safe, and I can keep you physically safe. I can meet all your needs. At the end of the day, I'm going to make sure that you are dry, fed, have water, and that you emotionally feel cared for. And that doesn't take somebody that's like trying to process your deepest, darkest traumas. It just takes a human being to show up and say, I care about you, and I have the skills to care about you. And so I think that's where I've found misses come from, missing the actual physical risks. And sometimes when you can demonstrate that you're attuned to physical risk, that bleeds into the emotional risks that are a part of that experience, so much more easily than the flop. And when, like, these are, like, when you developmentally think about where our populations are, like, why does play therapy really work? It's because somebody's not saying, can you tell me about that trauma? And like, how are you feeling when this thing happened? Like, a play therapist gets in there and gets out the little soldiers and gets out the Play-Doh and does that. And I think that, like, the population that wilderness therapy works with on the developmental spectrum really focuses on kids that are just edging out of that as being effective, like, therapy. And then, like, for, you know, so being good at the technical skills and the hard skills is just as effective. And I think we skew that sometimes. So
Well,
that's, yeah.
I think we're seeing this in the evolution of outdoor therapies, of this idea of doing less, you know, like just doing things together is really nice. And we were just talking about this with in Graham's presentation before. He was telling a story about one of his staff was on a walk with a client and this goat came out and just like blocked the trail. Now, a goat is not a brown bear, but getting rammed by a goat still hurts pretty good. And how do you regulate and roll with what's going on? And I think that kind of, I always think that's, I don't think everyone should be an outdoor therapy provider, just like I should not be a scuba diving instructor. I shouldn't. But I think that if we are going to work outside, knowing where our edge is of what we're willing to go with the flow. Some people can't do overnight. They don't have the, I can wake up at 3 a.m. and help a kid who peed in his sleeping bag, you know? And so knowing what your boundaries are to where you can be your best in the therapeutic container, I think is really great. And so I had another question and then I rambled it out of my head, which is typical.
I feel like what you just said, I know Josh is going to be able to answer something
Okay,
so
good.
well. He is like the most ridiculously regulated, and he has the to an nth degree of ability to remove himself from like outcomes attachment. And I have no idea where that came from. And like what you're saying is that it's like, I think that especially for our field staff, they're not really sophisticated clinicians. Like, you have to really be pulled away from outcomes attachment. You know, is that what you're saying? Is that anywhere where your question was leading to?
We can go with it. This is just the new direction we're headed. And for those, the definition of a field staff is really interesting. So at many outdoor programs, and this is similar a bit here, where there's a lot of, someone might, for instance, there's an organization outside of Sydney a bit, and it's a team of psychologists, let's say, and they'll put a group together, get that group ready for an expedition, and then hire their outward bound field staff to help run that trip. So that's kind of in the Australian context. In the US, there's many times where, for instance, when I was a social work student, I was working all the time outside. I didn't really have clinical responsibility, but I'm still part of the therapeutic process and part of the care team. So you're not the licensed clinical worker. And when I interviewed a bunch of young people for my research, it was the field staff, the people who were sleeping in the dirt with the young people, that were way more important than clinicians, than the people coming out and doing the talking and that sort of stuff. So it's when we say field staff, we kind of mean the boots on the ground with young people on expedition. And so field staff can have clinical training. I came to Crossings with a social work degree. So you can have clinical training, but my role, I think the field staff role, is being there in the experience and facilitating that. Josh, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll just, second and third and 15th, my anecdotal, I would research anecdotal talking with parents and students after they've graduated. I've worked with 4 different outside adventure therapy companies. And then right now I'm at a residential substance abuse recovery program with a very big adventure component as well. All of those people across the board will say that the field guides are or the people, the boots on the ground people, impacted them. I would say maybe not all. It's a huge. I'll just read it what you said, where it's the people that are there with them in the mud, like in the rain, like, or at meals, all these things that are really connecting with the guys, or I say guys because I'm working at an all men's facility now. Where, yeah, I think it's really powerful. And I think there too, like what Margaret was saying about kind of just like being there for them, and maybe not just being like a emotionless, or I don't think she said emotionless robot, but that's what I heard. Just I think just to recognize it, like, not about being there for them, and again, like the attachment of like, yeah, you can have a hard day and I'm still gonna show up. And I think that's the field staff piece is, they're there because they're really struggling working on something. And it's like they're like called like the practice ground, where it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna hold this against you if you're having a really hard time. Like, you're here because you're having a hard time. And it's like, I think that's where it can be really impactful. That's where they see that day in and day out, where again, like, I think, a lot of programs I work, they'll see the therapist maybe 2 times a week, or Crossings less than. And so I think that just getting that consistent, like, attachment, like secure attachment from those field staff is can be the biggest thing that folks get from these programs.
Yeah. And when it comes to, I mean, both of your journeys have been since Crossings, you've been together. And I wonder, have you done expeditions together? 52 days.
Yeah.
And
So we've done 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think so. 2 or 3. Did we do a half one? I don't know. Yeah.
So you've done, what's the dynamic like of being in a partnership and then working together? Because my partner, Renee, we've got 10-year anniversary this year. I think she'd kill me if she watched me work.
I think it was really cool. I think, going back to, we don't have to like talk about how we fell in love, but I think it's just like when you're like using the same hole in the ground as the bathroom, you like skip a bunch of steps in the relationship, in the courtship, it's like, so I think that you just like really get to know someone really quickly. And again, like, there was some times where it was really hard, and really, because you're like maybe on day 35 of a group of these 9 kids that are really hard, where you're kind of like running on empathy fumes, and like all these things where it's like, where I think you really get to see someone's true colors. And so I think it was great, where I think I would do it again in a heartbeat. Actually, no, I wouldn't, because I don't want to go be out in the woods for that long anymore. But
we have 2 kids now too, so those buddies are coming with us.
Yeah. So the 4 of us will do that. Yeah. But I think I can't imagine. I feel like we had this cheat code for starting a relationship, because we had worked we worked one program while we were like just kind of dating, and then we worked another one while after we were gotten together, and it was just like, it was great. Maybe Margaret freaking hates it, and we'll just talk about it right now.
It's the worst. Actually, this is an intervention. I'm just kidding. No, actually, it's so funny because we weren't dating on the first trip we worked together. And I will never forget, I had a buddy in the front of my canoe. We were paddling, and Buddy was struggling and he was feeling sad. And so he did not want to paddle. And Josh is having a good time with his bow partner and a couple of kids in canoes without a guide. And I just was paddling along and trying to chat. And Josh had dropped back, and then all of a sudden I hear this like woo woo woo. And Josh comes like paddling up and took the kid and said, "Are you okay?" And the kid was like, "What?" And he leaned him back on the spray deck because we had ocean going canoes, so we had to put spray decks and stuff. And he like did a pretend like gush, 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 and like revived him. And it fully, Josh obviously had a relationship with that kiddo that could withstand a really silly interaction, and it fully brought that kid out of that moment of just feeling really shut down and unable to engage in the moment of paddling and being with the group and being with the milieu. And it was such a cool thing. And I was like, oh man, Josh Kelso is cool. That was so sweet. And then we just got to spend days like singing silly songs and also watching kids really, really struggle and watching each other kind of engage in how that looks. So I do feel like sometimes I'm like, yeah, we moved in after 3 months of dating, and I try to communicate that to people that haven't been field staff, and I would say, but actually that was the equivalent of like dating for 5 years. So it's okay that we moved in that quickly. Yeah.
Thanks for that. It's so interesting. One relationship ended because of how often I was in the woods. And I think it was seeing me be goofy and stupid in the woods that I think this person was like, no. So, but I know there's a few people here, and I know it's late for you all. So if anyone has a question they'd like to ask Margaret or Josh, one of the things I would like to ask is, as you keep progressing in your career, what are the new things that seem really important to you? I know we all talk about trauma now, and I know we've got all this. The landscape is changing. We're seeing more young people with less externalizing behaviors, much more internalizing behaviors, and so I'm curious, what are the new things that you're seeing that are changing in the landscape of outdoor work and the therapeutic lens?
I think this is very maybe timely from where I'm working now, but really it's just the focus back from like essentially like dual diagnosis things is something that I'm really thinking of, and hearing that language a lot more of like specifically substance use is concentrating on the primary mental health concern that is maybe leading to unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so I think that's something that I've seen definitely change since starting with crossings, is like the focusing on not focusing on the symptom, focusing on the cause. And the place where I am now, it's truly primary mental health focused. And then with that, there's some secondary like substance abuse education, substance addiction education, things like that. So to me, that feels like something that's really shifted just from the programs I've been in the past 11 years or so.
It's really funny when you read any randomized clinical trial that talks about the treatment of depression, and it's the only thing that's wrong with these 30 clients. We swear to you, this is the only problem in their lives, and this treatment radically like somehow these researchers find the same 30 people that only have one problem in their life. You know, and it's like, who are these people? Because can I start working with them, please? That sounds way easy. Margaret, what
Yeah.
are you changing in your landscape?
Actually, it's the same thing. I feel like the shift from symptoms thinking to root cause thinking, and mostly I work with like organizational culture and I work with our employee population, but I think it honestly shows up in very similar ways. And I focus on risk management, but I think a lot of the risk management sciences and thinking is easily transferable into organizational culture, and even I guess like even therapeutic, like look, I'm not a like licensed clinician by any means, but I do think that it's so easy to look at like how an organization functions to see how a family could function. And I think that like safety one and two thinking is like safety one, safety like risk management thinking is really focusing on the symptom. Like somebody did something wrong. I'm going to make that person not do the thing wrong. Where safety two is thinking about something like something made that person do the wrong thing. So how can I think about what was their situation to make them choose that in the moment, and zooming out from the actual incident, which that's something I really love. And I think it's become more culturally acceptable to be able to pose questions like that, because especially in a really litigious society like America, it's hard not to find the easiest person to be sued and remove them from the situation. But I'm really grateful for some really exceptional lawyers and some really exceptional, insurance companies that are leaning into some of that thinking and really being able to protect really complex organizations and really complex incidents because they understand those things. And that is really exciting and fun for me.
Amazing. And Chris left you a nice see you later note about your inspiring story and jealousy of your career, because it is amazing all the different places you all have gotten to go as well. And to when your office is these wonderful places with bears and snakes, it's really awesome. I was wondering, this is the question we get the most, and I think we can wrap up on this from both of your positions, whether as the outdoor risk side of things and outdoor programming to the counselor, but then even as field staff, people wanting to get into this field. We know that university isn't always it's a great place to go get a counseling or social work degree, but it's not the place where you're most often going to sit and have that blend of, there's places and there's silos where that happens. What advice do you give someone who, and maybe as generic as possible, because we've got people from all over the world that watch these things, what's your advice for people interested in getting into this field? And even if they're already a licensed therapist and going, I'm an outdoorsy person too, how do I blend these two? So what advice do you give for those people?
I think, Margaret said something earlier about where I had way more technical skills with going to Alaska. Like I had a lot of whitewater skill. I had zero canoeing skill. That's not to say like I could read water and it was like ocean canoeing. What I had done 0 times before going up to Alaska, and so I think that's the biggest thing. Is like there are things like you can be taught lots of things if you have the will and like the mindset to do that work. Go and do it. Like go and do it. I would say some people will be like, well, I don't know how to camp, or I've never been camping, or I don't know how to canoe, or whatever, translate that to any program that you're thinking of doing. There were people that went up to crossings that had never camped like before, and they were changed people's lives, like 'cause they went up there and they like connected with the kids and were resilient and And so I think that's if there's something that you like doing, I would say don't look at anything as like you have deficits. I think you can be taught lots of hard skill stuff and soft skill stuff if you have the drive and to do it.
I think that's a really good answer, because it's also, even if you are and just for those in the Australian context, like we have, if you're interested in testing the water, there's so many nonprofit organizations that will take volunteers. I mean, for my PhD, in exchange for being able to do some research, I went and volunteered and ran a 7-day expedition with young people who had lost a parent to cancer. Like, you can go out there with people who know what they're doing and also be out there with them, bringing your expertise to it, and knowing that I'm comfortable on expedition mode. And then we have organizations here. Riding for the disabled is with horses. It's all over Australia, and I believe they will take volunteers. I could be totally lying to you all about that. But even the big thing that's happening now, which is amazing, is on primetime television, we're finally, in our nighttime, popular news, we're finally getting surfing on the radar, that people are surfing with young people who live in a wheelchair, and they have the Surf Chair 2000, where they're with a guide who's helping them get the experience of surfing. And surfing with veterans is huge at the moment. So there's all these different areas to search for. I do think sometimes for a lot of people, the terminology makes it hard to find. So adventure therapy is often, it can be limited because people who live in a wheelchair might not think they're able to adventure. And so it's where they go to find things. So it's really important to cast a wide net. And so you can always test the waters. Even Operation Flinders, which is their office is 15 minutes down the road, is almost entirely volunteer run. And they do week-long expeditions with over 1,000 kids a year. And that's kids from all over South Australia. So that's another place that there's a lot of places if we know how to find them. Margaret, what about you to wrap up? What advice do you have for someone who's interested in this work but might be a little green at it?
I guess like repair is the name of the game with a lot of it, like which is kind of a weird thing to say, but like it's okay to make mistakes. And that is therapy, is that a mistake is made and the therapy is the repair. And so even being the person to make the mistake, demonstrating that you're able to make a repair is just as effective as being the person that is perfect and can do everything right the first time. I think that I worked with a medical director in an EMT setting or emergency medical technician setting that I think I was really upset about something that ended up being pretty benign. And he just said, Margaret, it's really hard to kill people. And if the person's going to die and you're doing everything that you've been trained to do and they still die, you probably like couldn't have done anything anyway. So it's okay that they died. And I was like, oh my God, that's so brutal to say it that way. But also
This
when
is
I
where the
could
emotional robot comes in, right, Josh?
absolutely, yes. Like, yeah. But like, and well, maybe that is the Vulcan part of me coming out. Like, it did make sense to me because it's like, what's the point of like, yeah, sometimes maybe I don't need to talk about people dying. That's not that inspirational. But like, I guess ultimately it's just about like, do everything you know how to do. And if you make a mistake, that's okay because you hopefully are in a system that can support you through that. You should have like mentors that you can go to and process that with, and ultimately go to the person who the harm was done with and repair it. And that's going to be great. And you're going to have the most amount of learning from that. And I think that that's something I'm seeing a lot with like, especially the direct care and field staff that I work with, is they're so scared of making a mistake. And like, who cares? It's fine. Like, do the I feel statement wrong. Guess what? Say you did it wrong and then repair after. And that's just as effective therapy. I think. I'm not a licensed clinician, so I can't actually say that.
No, I think I read a book once, and I don't think it was a very good therapy book, but obviously I've remembered this from 10 years ago. That the worker said your clients will almost always forgive a mistake from your head and never one from your heart. That if you ask a stupid question, if you have a good relationship, you'll have the opportunity to repair it. But if you haven't done the work to form that relationship, now you have a serious rupture and you've broken trust, or broken that this person even believes that you're capable of helping them in any way. So I think as Graham Pringle says, slow is fast. Like, the slower you go with that relationship, the faster you'll get towards where you are hoping to go. But anyway, I thank you both for letting me rope you in to do this. This was a lot of fun. Even though we're all miles apart, I hope we get to hang out soon, because it reminded me of all our time, while brief in Alaska, but how great that was. And we should totally try to rope everybody into some sort of catch up at some point. And I was going to tell you all, Nevin and I are of course working on a new book idea, even though we said we wouldn't do it, but it's not adventure therapy related. And we are interviewing Martin Broken Leg, who is a Lakota Sioux man, and he wrote a book in the 80s called it's dubbed the Little Green Book, because every youth agency and foster care home across Canada had this book. And it's like the youth working with its indigenous model and all this stuff. And Martin Broken Leg's amazing. So Nevin has interviewed Martin Broken Leg, and I'm watching the interview and he's going, yeah, I do think the best model I've ever seen working with youth, I forget this guy's name, Steve Przunka. And so we're like, great. So now the director of Alaska Crossings is getting embedded into this book that has nothing to do with adventure therapy. But it was so funny, all the ties of this community and all the great people we get to engage with. But with that, thank you so much. I'll send everyone who's watching the recording or anything, I'll send the email out with all these different resources you can have and ways to connect with people and this and that. But Margaret and Josh, the power couple, thanks so much for doing this.
Can we just say, I mean, power couple is extreme here. Like, if you saw our laundry room, you would be like, they are not a power couple.
I noticed the two of you are not in the same room, so there might be something to it.
That was my choice fully. Josh said it was weird, and I cannot focus without having, that was me.
No. Thank you so much for chatting. I know it's probably dinner time or something, and go rescue your kids from the parents. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
and
Will.
I
happy anniversary.
appreciate it, Will.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so
Great
much
to see
to
you, man.
everyone who came. It was really fun.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Yep. See you.